Why didn't you tell me? I have a right to know my own children. I want to be their father.
Darius Ashford's hands trembled as he stared across the JFK terminal, his 10,000 briefcase slipping from his grip and hitting the polished floor with a sharp crack that nobody else seemed to notice. The world had gone silent, except for the roaring in his ears, a sound like ocean waves crashing against rocks, threatening to pull him under. She was there, 20 feet away. Sienna, his ex-wife, stood in the commercial boarding area, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing faded jeans and a sweater he'd never seen before. But that wasn't what made his heart stop. It wasn't what made the $300 million Singapore deal evaporate from his mind like morning fog. It was the 2 infant carriers she held, one in each hand. Twin babies, a boy in blue, a girl in pink, both sleeping peacefully, their tiny faces turned toward each other, like they were sharing secrets even in sleep. And they looked exactly like him. The math hit him like a freight train. 2 years since the divorce. 9 months for pregnancy, if those babies were 3 or 4 months old, and they couldn't be more than that. Then she'd been pregnant when she walked out, when she'd stood in their penthouse and told him she couldn't do it anymore, when she'd refused his money, his explanations, his desperate promises to change. She'd been carrying his children, and she never said a word. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality cracked down the middle, where everything you thought you knew about your life turned out to be built on lies? That's where Darius stood right now, watching the woman he'd loved, still loved, if he was being honest, struggle with a diaper bag that kept sliding off her shoulder while she tried to manage 2 infants alone. 2 years. She'd hidden his children from him for 2 entire years. Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Mr. Ashford? Marcus, his assistant, appeared at his elbow, concern etched across his face. Sir, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Darius couldn't answer. His throat had closed up completely. He watched as an older woman with gray hair approached Sienna, taking one of the carriers to give her a moment to reorganize. Sienna smiled, that same grateful, genuine smile that used to undo him completely. And Darius felt the knife twist deeper in his chest. He'd missed everything. The pregnancy glow, the first ultrasound, the moment she'd felt them kick, the birth, their first smiles, every milestone, every sleepless night, every precious second of their first months on Earth. All of it gone, stolen, or maybe not stolen. Maybe willingly kept from him because she'd looked at the man he'd become and decided her children deserved better than a father who was never there. The thought made him physically ill. Marcus cleared his throat. Sir, the Singapore flight board's in 15 minutes. The acquisition team is waiting for your final approval on the... Cancel it, Darius said. His voice came out rough, like he'd been screaming for hours. I'm sorry, sir. Cancel Singapore. Cancel the acquisition. Cancel everything. Darius couldn't tear his eyes away from Sienna. She was laughing now at something the older woman said, her whole face lighting up. He remembered that laugh. God, he'd almost forgotten how it sounded, but hearing it now, even from this distance, brought back every memory at once. Coffee shops and late-night conversations. Sunday mornings, in bed. The way she'd challenge his ideas and make him think harder, be better, before he'd thrown it all away for quarterly earnings and board meetings. Marcus's face had gone pale. "Sir, this deal is worth $300 million. The team has been working on it for 8 months. If we back out now, then we back out." Darius finally looked at his assistant, and whatever Marcus saw in his face made him take a step back. "Get me on that Los Angeles flight, the one she's taking. I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. Buy out first class if you need to. Buy the whole plane. Just get me on it." "But sir, that's a commercial flight. It's already delayed. You don't have a ticket. And even if I could get you one, you'd be in economy with—" "I don't care if I have to sit on the wing." Darius's voice came out sharper than he intended. He took a breath, trying to calm the chaos roaring through his system. "Please, Marcus, just make it happen." His assistant stared at him for a long moment, then nodded and pulled out his phone, already dialing as he walked away. Darius moved closer to the barrier between the private and commercial terminals, staying in the shadows where Sienna wouldn't spot him. He needed to see them, needed to understand what he was looking at. Even though his brain had already accepted the truth, his heart was screaming. Those were his children, his son and daughter, and he'd known nothing about them until 30 seconds ago, when he'd happened to look up from his phone at exactly the right or wrong moment. The older woman handed the carrier back to Sienna and said something that made her smile again before walking away. Sienna settled into a seat near the gate, positioning both carriers on either side of her like tiny sentries. She pulled out a bottle and picked up the baby boy, cradling him against her shoulder, with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this alone for months. Alone. That word kept echoing in Darius's head. She'd gone through all of this completely alone. No partner to hold her hand during doctor's visits. No one to run out for weird pregnancy cravings at 2 in the morning. No one to tell her she was doing a good job when the exhaustion became too much. Because he hadn't been there. Because she hadn't told him. But he'd have been there if she had. 2 years ago, would he have stepped up? Or would he have done exactly what she clearly feared? Promised to be present while slowly letting work consume every hour, every thought, every piece of himself until there was nothing left for her or their children. The baby boy, his son, finished the bottle and let out a small burp. Sienna laughed softly and switched him to her other shoulder, starting to feed the baby girl now. Her movements were confident, but Darius could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the dark circles under her eyes even from this distance. A young mother sitting nearby leaned over. "Twins must be so challenging. Are you managing okay?" "Some days are easier than others," Sienna replied, her voice carrying across the terminal. That voice. Darius closed his eyes for a second, letting it wash over him. "But they're the greatest blessing I could have asked for. They saved me, actually. Gave me purpose when I'd lost everything else." Lost everything else. Did she mean their marriage? Did she mean him? Their father helping at all? The other woman asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry. That's too personal. I shouldn't have." "It's okay." Sienna's smile looked sadder now. "No, he's not in the picture. It's just us 3. But we're doing fine. We're doing better than fine, actually. Not in the picture. Those 4 words hit Darius harder than any business failure ever had. She was telling strangers that he wasn't in the picture, as if he'd chosen to be absent, as if he'd known about these babies and decided they weren't worth his time. The anger came then, hot and sharp, mixing with the hurt and confusion into something that made his hands shake. He'd spent 2 years believing he was the wronged party. 2 years thinking she'd given up on them too easily. 2 years convincing himself that he'd been trying to build a future for them, while she'd been too impatient to see his vision. But she'd been pregnant, scared, alone, going through something that should have brought them closer together. Except she'd looked at their crumbling marriage and decided he didn't deserve to know. Maybe she'd been right. The thought made him want to put his fist through the terminal window. Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Los Angeles, the gate agent announced over the intercom. Sienna stood carefully, managing both carriers with the efficiency born from months of practice. Other passengers moved around her, some offering sympathetic smiles, others looking annoyed at the prospect of crying babies on their flight. She didn't seem to notice either reaction. Her entire focus was on those 2 tiny humans, making sure they were secure and comfortable as she made her way toward the gate. Darius's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Got you a seat. Business class. Board in 20 minutes. Gate 37. He should feel relieved. Instead, all he felt was the crushing weight of a decision that would change everything. He could get on that plane, follow her to Los Angeles, confront her and demand answers about why she'd kept his children secret, demand his rights as their father, get lawyers involved, force his way into their lives whether she wanted him there or not. Or he could walk away, go to Singapore, close the $300 million deal, pretend he'd never seen her in this terminal, pretend those babies, his babies, didn't exist. Except that wasn't really an option anymore, was it? You couldn't unsee something like this. You couldn't unknow that you were a father. Marcus returned, slightly out of breath. All set, sir. I've also started gathering information on Ms. Ashford's current situation. Should have preliminary details by the time we land. She kept our name. Darius didn't know why that detail mattered, but it did. You said Ms. Ashford. Yes, sir. Legally, she's still Sienna Ashford. Never changed it back after the divorce. Why would she keep his name, but hide his children? Nothing about this made sense, and Darius needed answers. Needed to understand what had driven her to make this choice. Needed to see those babies up close and confirm what his heart already knew. He watched Sienna disappear down the jetway, the last passenger to board. In 20 minutes, he'd be on the same plane, breathing the same recycled air, flying toward the same destination. But they'd still be worlds apart, her in economy managing 2 infants alone, him in business class with nothing but his thoughts, and the growing realization that the empire he'd built meant absolutely nothing compared to what he'd just lost. Or maybe what he'd never known he had in the first place. Marcus was talking again, something about notifying the Singapore team and rescheduling meetings, but Darius barely heard him. All he could think about was the weight of those infant carriers, the way Sienna had held them so carefully, the pure love in her eyes when she'd looked down at them. Would she ever look at him like that again? Had she ever looked at him like that? Or had he been too busy staring at spreadsheets and profit margins to notice? 20 minutes That's all the time he had to figure out what he was going to say when he saw her in Los Angeles. What words could possibly bridge 2 years of absence and secrets? What explanation could make any of this okay? But as Darius made his way toward Gate 37, his mind kept circling back to the same thought. Those were his children. His blood, part of him walking around in the world. And he'd known nothing about them. Whatever happened next, whatever Sienna's reasons for keeping this secret, he couldn't let another day pass without meeting his son and daughter, even if it meant destroying the fragile peace she'd built without him. So what would you do if you discovered you'd been a father for months and nobody told you? How would you handle it? Would you be angry, hurt, desperate? Drop a comment and let me know, because this story is just getting started. And trust me, what happens when Darius finally confronts Sienna will shake you to your core. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you don't want to miss what comes next. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the speakers, welcoming passengers aboard Flight 447 to Los Angeles. But Darius heard none of it. He sat in seat 3A, business class, staring at the divider that separated him from economy. Somewhere beyond that barrier, 3 rows into the cheaper seats, Sienna was settling in with their children. He'd watched her board, had seen the gate agent's sympathetic smile as she'd struggled with both carriers and her carry-on bag. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up, walk back there, and help her. But Marcus had given him the intel he'd requested, and what he'd learned made him hesitate. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, worked part-time as a consultant for a child development center, barely making enough to cover rent and basic expenses. She'd completed her doctorate while pregnant, defended her dissertation at 7 months, her belly swollen, with twins, while he'd been in New York, celebrating a merger that now felt completely meaningless. The babies were named Iris and Felix, 4 months old. Born at Huntington Hospital after what the records indicated was a grueling 18-hour labor. Natural birth, no complications. But she'd gone through it alone. The birth certificates listed only her name. The father's line was blank, as if he didn't exist at all, as if she'd erased him from their lives before they'd even begun. Darius's hands clenched on the armrests. The leather creaked under his grip, and the businessman next to him glanced over nervously before pretending to be very interested in the safety card. A baby's cry pierced through the ambient noise of passengers settling in, high-pitched, insistent. Darius's entire body went rigid. Was that Felix? Iris? He couldn't tell, but the sound hit him somewhere deep in his chest in a place he didn't know existed until 30 minutes ago. The crying stopped almost immediately, replaced by Sienna's soft voice humming something he couldn't quite make out. The melody was familiar, though, tugging at memories he'd buried. She used to hum when she cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings, back when they'd had Sunday mornings together, back before his calendar had become a wall of back-to-back meetings and transcontinental flights. "Sir, would you like something to drink before takeoff?" The flight attendant smiled at him, professionally pleasant. "Whiskey? Neat. Double." The words came out harsher than he intended, but she didn't flinch, just nodded and moved on. Marcus had texted him more information during boarding. Sienna's mother had passed away 3 years ago, before their marriage. Her father was out of the picture, had been since she was in college. No siblings, no family support system. She'd been going to a mother's support group at a community center every Thursday evening, the only social interaction his research could find outside of work. She'd done this completely alone. Every doctor's appointment, every moment of fear and worry during the pregnancy, every decision about cribs and car seats and pediatricians, all of it without him, because she'd chosen not to tell him. The question was why. The flight attendant returned with his drink. Darius downed half of it in one swallow, welcoming the burn. It didn't help. Nothing was going to help except answers. And those were sitting 3 rows back in seat 27B, probably trying to keep 2 infants calm during takeoff. The plane began to taxi, engines roaring to life. More crying from economy. Both babies this time, a harmony of distress that made several passengers groan. Darius turned in his seat, straining to see past the divider, but the angle was wrong. All he caught was a glimpse of Sienna's ponytail as she bent over one of the carriers. "First time, father?" The businessman next to him had apparently decided to break the silence. "I remember those days. My wife and I had 3. The flights were always the worst part." Darius looked at him, this stranger with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and almost laughed. "First time, father." Yes? No. He didn't even know how to answer that question. He was a father, had been for 4 months apparently, but this was the first time he'd known about it. Did that count? Something like that, he managed. It gets easier. The first few months are survival mode, but then they smile at you, really smile, not just gas. And suddenly all the sleepless nights don't matter anymore. The man pulled out his phone, showing a photo of 3 grinning kids. "That's my crew. 10, 8, and 6 now. Best thing I ever did, having them. Best thing I ever did." The words echoed in Darius's head as he finished his whiskey. What was the best thing he'd ever done? Built Ashford Industries from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, appeared on Forbes lists and CNBC interviews, bought the penthouse overlooking Central Park. All of it felt hollow now. Sitting on this plane while his children cried in economy, and their mother handled it alone because he'd been too obsessed with success to notice he was losing everything that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with an email from his board of directors, demanding to know why he'd canceled Singapore. The deal was time-sensitive. Competitors were circling. If he didn't close this acquisition in the next 40 to 8 hours, they'd lose the opportunity entirely. Darius deleted the email without responding. The crying had stopped. Again. Through the gap between seats, he caught a flash of movement. Sienna's hand, rocking one of the carriers in a gentle rhythm. Her wedding ring was gone, obviously, but he could see a simple silver band on her right hand that he didn't recognize. Something new, something from the life she'd built without him. The plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinked off. Passengers started moving around, heading to bathrooms, stretching their legs. Darius unbuckled slowly, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He could go back there, just walk to economy like he was heading to the bathroom. See them, see his children up close instead of from across a terminal. But what would he say? "Hi, Sienna. Funny running into you here. Are those my kids?" His phone buzzed again. Marcus. From his seat, somewhere in the middle of the plane. "Do you want me to approach her first? Feel out the situation." No. This was something Darius needed to handle himself, even if he had no idea how. He stood up, moving into the aisle. His legs felt unsteady, like he was walking on the deck of a ship in rough seas. Several passengers were lined up for the bathroom. Good. That gave him an excuse to move through economy, to get closer. Row 15, row 20, row 25. And then he saw them. Sienna had her back to him, bent over the carriers that were secured in the seats next to her. She'd paid for 3 seats, her and both babies, probably maxing out credit cards to do it. Her carry-on was stuffed under the seat in front, overflowing with diapers and wipes and bottles. One of the babies was fussing, making small, unhappy sounds. Sienna pulled her out of the carrier. Iris, based on the pink outfit, held her against her shoulder, swaying gently despite the confined space. Shh, sweet girl, I know it's uncomfortable. We'll be there soon, and then you can stretch out in your crib. Just a little longer. Her voice was pure love and exhaustion mixed together. Darius stood frozen in the aisle, 3 feet away, staring at his daughter. Iris had a shock of dark hair that stuck up at odd angles. Sienna's nose, his chin, or what would become his chin as she grew. Her tiny fist was curled against her mother's neck, and even from here he could see the delicate perfection of her fingers. A flight attendant touched his elbow. "Sir, you're blocking the aisle. Do you need to get past?" The words broke whatever trance he'd been. Sienna turned slightly, probably to see what the holdup was, and Darius saw her profile. The exhaustion was even more evident up close. Dark circles under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there during their marriage. He moved forward quickly, ducking into the bathroom before she could see his face. His hands shook as he locked the door behind him, leaning against the tiny sink and staring at his reflection in the mirror. What was he doing? He couldn't approach her here on this plane, with nowhere for either of them to go and 2 infants between them. This conversation, whatever form it took, needed space and privacy and time. But seeing Iris up close, seeing the way Sienna held her with such tender care, had erased any doubt that might have lingered. Those were his children, his family, and he'd missed 4 months of their lives because Sienna had decided he didn't deserve to know they existed. The anger surged back, hot and righteous. Whatever his failures as a husband, and they were many, he could admit that now, didn't he have a right to know he was a father? Didn't Felix and Iris deserve to have both parents in their lives? Or maybe they were better off without him. Maybe Sienna had looked at the man he'd become, the one who missed their anniversary for a board meeting, who forgot her birthday because of a deal in Tokyo, who promised to be home for dinner and showed up at midnight with takeout and apologies, and decided her children needed more than that. Maybe she'd been protecting them from him. The thought made him sick. Someone knocked on the bathroom door. Darius splashed water on his face, trying to pull himself together, then stepped out. The aisle was clear now. He could see all the way back to Sienna's row. She'd put Iris back in her carrier and was now holding Felix, feeding him a bottle while she stared out the window at the clouds below. Did she ever think about him? Did she wonder if she'd made the right choice, keeping this secret? Or had she convinced herself that he was better off not knowing, that his absence was a gift rather than a theft? Darius made his way back to business class, ignoring the businessman's curious look. He reclaimed his seat and ordered another whiskey, then pulled out his phone. Marcus had sent more information. Sienna's flight landed at LAX at 4:47 p.m. She'd booked a rideshare to her apartment in Pasadena. The address was right there on his screen. 2847 Oak Street, Unit 2B. He could be there tonight, could knock on her door and demand answers, could force this confrontation she'd been avoiding for 4 months. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the memory of her voice in the terminal, telling that stranger that the babies had saved her when she'd lost everything else. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her shoulders, the weight of single motherhood pressing down on someone who'd once been so full of light and possibility. Or maybe it was the growing realization that he'd already lost her once by being too aggressive, too controlling, too convinced that his way was the only way. If he barged in now, angry and demanding, he'd just repeat the same mistakes that had destroyed their marriage in the first place. The flight attendant came by with the drink cart again. "Another whiskey, sir?" "No." Darius surprised himself with the answer. "Just water, please." He needed to think clearly, needed to approach this with strategy and care, the way he approached any negotiation that truly mattered. Except this wasn't business. This was his life, his children, his chance, maybe his only chance, to be the father and man he should have been all along. The question was whether Sienna would give him that chance, or if he'd already burned that bridge beyond repair. 2 hours later, the plane began its descent into Los Angeles. Darius watched through the window as the sprawling city came into view. Somewhere down there, his children's home, a modest apartment in Pasadena where Sienna was raising their twins alone on a part-time salary, probably struggling with every bill, every unexpected expense. He could fix that, could throw money at the problem, set up trust funds, buy them a house. But he'd learned, too late with Sienna, but maybe not too late for Felix and Iris, that money couldn't buy what mattered most. Presence, time, tension, love that showed up not in bank transfers, but in daily moments. 2 a.m. feedings and first words and scraped knees, kissed better. Could he be that person? Or was he too broken, too shaped by his own absent father and his obsession with proving he was worth something? The wheels touched down with a slight bump. Passengers began gathering their belongings immediately, even though they still had to taxi to the gate. Darius stayed seated, watching through the gap between seats as Sienna carefully secured both carriers, checking the straps twice, making sure everything was perfect before the plane stopped moving. She was a good mother, even from this distance. Even knowing her for only a few stolen glances, he could see that. Whatever else had happened between them, whatever secrets she'd kept, she loved those babies with a fierceness that was almost visible. The plane pulled up to the gate. The seatbelt sign dinked off. Chaos erupted as everyone tried to leave at once. Darius waited, watched as passengers slowly filed out, saw Sienna gathering her things, trying to manage both carriers and her overstuffed bag. A flight attendant helped her, taking one of the carriers while Sienna juggled everything else. He should go help, should reveal himself now, and just deal with whatever came next. But his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I've booked you a hotel in Pasadena, close to her apartment. Whenever you're ready." Whenever you're ready. As if he'd ever be ready for this conversation. As if there was a right way to approach the woman who'd hidden your children from you 4 months while you built an empire and convinced yourself you were doing just fine. Darius waited until Sienna had completely deplaned before he stood up. He made his way through the terminal slowly, keeping enough distance that she wouldn't spot him. He watched as she struggled with a rideshare driver who seemed annoyed about loading 2 car seats. Watched as she tipped him anyway. Probably more than she could afford, because that was who she'd always been. Kind even when the world wasn't kind to her. The car pulled away. Darius stood in the pickup area, his own car service waiting, and made a decision. "Take me to the Langham in Pasadena," he told his driver. Not to her apartment. Not tonight. She'd just endured a flight with 2 infants. She needed rest, needed to get the babies settled. Barging in tonight would be cruel, and he'd been cruel enough already, even if it had been through absence rather than action. Tomorrow, he'd go tomorrow morning, when he'd had time to figure out what to say, how to explain that he wanted to be part of their lives without sounding like he was making demands, how to apologize for being the kind of man she couldn't trust with the most important news of their lives, how to beg for a second chance he probably didn't deserve. As the car merged into Los Angeles traffic, Darius stared at his phone. The address was right there. 2847 Oak Street, Unit 2B. 15 minutes away, maybe 20, with traffic. His children were there, right now, probably being fed, changed, put down for the night by a mother who'd been handling everything alone since the moment she'd peed on that pregnancy test. And tomorrow, he'd show up at her door and change everything. Whether she was ready or not. Whether he was ready or not. Because those babies, Felix and Iris, his son and daughter, deserved to know their father. And he deserved the chance to prove he could be the man they needed him to be, even if Sienna never believed it. What do you think Sienna's going to say when she opens that door and sees him standing there? Do you think she'll slam it in his face? Or will she give him a chance to explain? Drop your predictions in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button. This story is about to get intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The hotel room was too quiet. Darius lay on top of the covers, still fully clothed at 3:47 a.m., staring at the ceiling while his mind replayed every moment from the terminal on an endless loop. Sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sienna's face, saw those 2 infant carriers, heard that stranger's question, is their father helping at all? His phone sat on the nightstand. Marcus's last text still glowing on the dual screen. Lights went out in her apartment at 11:47 p.m. Almost 4 hours ago. She was probably asleep now, stealing whatever rest she could before the babies woke hungry and crying. Did they wake up every 2 hours? Every 3? He had no idea what 4-month-old infants needed, and that ignorance felt like another failure stacked on top of all the others. Darius rolled out of bed and walked to the window. Pasadena sprawled below, streetlights creating pools of amber in the darkness. Somewhere out there, less than 2 miles away, his children were sleeping. His children. The words still felt foreign in his mind, like a language he'd never learned to speak. What would he say to her? He'd been rehearsing variations all night, but every version sounded wrong. Too angry, too demanding, too much like the man who'd driven her away in the first place. Why didn't you tell me? Accusatory, putting her on the defensive immediately. I have a right to know my own children. True, but aggressive. Starting with rights instead of understanding. I want to be their father. Presumptuous, as if wanting it made him worthy of it. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window, a man who looked successful by every measure except the ones that mattered. Expensive watch, designer clothes, rumpled from a day of travel. The face of someone who'd conquered boardrooms and built empires while completely missing what was happening in his own life. His father had looked like this too, Darius realized. Always tired, but wired. Always thinking about the next deal, the next opportunity. Always convinced that providing financially was the same as being present. "I'm not going to be like him," Darius said out loud to his reflection. The words sounded hollow at 4 a.m. in an empty hotel room. But he'd already become exactly like him, hadn't he? That was the whole problem. Sienna had looked at their marriage, at the pattern of broken promises and missed moments, and she'd extrapolated forward. She'd imagined him as a father, distracted, absent, always prioritizing work, and decided her children deserved better. Maybe she'd been right to hide the pregnancy. Maybe she'd been protecting Felix and Iris from the disappointment of part-time father who showed up when it was convenient and vanished when business called. The thought made him want to put his fist through the window. But what if she'd been wrong? What if he would have changed, would have stepped up, if she'd just given him the chance? They'd never know now. She'd made the decision for both of them, and he'd spent 4 months as a father without knowing it, while she'd struggled alone with twins and a dissertation and probably more fear than she'd ever admit. Darius picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Dr. Reeves, his therapist. They hadn't talked in over a year, not since the divorce had been finalized, and Darius had convinced himself he was fine, that he'd moved on, that throwing himself into work was a healthy coping mechanism rather than an avoidance tactic. It was too early to call, but he sent a text anyway. "I need an emergency session. Today, if possible. Something's happened." The reply came almost immediately, despite the hour. 10 a.m. work. "Come to the office. I'm in Los Angeles. Video call, then. 10 a.m. Pacific. Are you safe?" Was he safe? Darius looked around the hotel room. At the minibar he hadn't touched. At the laptop closed on the desk, with 100 unanswered emails. Physically, sure. Emotionally, he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong step away from falling. "I'm safe, just confused and angry, and I don't know what to. We'll figure it out together." 10 a.m. Darius set the phone down and returned to staring out the window. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, that pre-dawn gray that meant morning was coming whether he was ready or not. Somewhere out there, Sienna was probably waking up to the first cries of hungry babies, stumbling out of bed exhausted, going through the routine she'd developed without him. Bottles and diapers and soothing words in the dark. He could be there, could show up right now and help with the morning feeding. But that felt too aggressive, too invasive. She didn't know he'd followed her. Didn't know he was in Pasadena, less than 2 miles away, counting the hours until he could knock on her door. What would her face look like when she opened it and saw him standing there? Shock, probably. Fear, maybe. Anger, definitely. All the emotions he was feeling reflected back at him. Except she'd had 4 months to build walls against this moment. 4 months to convince herself she'd made the right choice. 4 months to create a life that didn't include him. And he was about to blow all of that apart. The guilt mixed with the anger, creating something toxic that sat in his chest like acid. He'd failed as a husband. That much was clear, undeniable. But he hadn't been given the chance to fail or succeed as a father, and that theft felt almost worse than anything else. Darius's phone buzzed. A work email, marked urgent. The board wanted an emergency meeting about Singapore. The deal was falling apart. Competitors were moving in. If he didn't act now, he deleted it without reading past the first paragraph. Another email came through immediately, then another. His CFO, his head of acquisitions, the chairman of the board, all demanding to know what was going on, why he'd abandoned a $300 million deal with no explanation. Family emergency. He typed back to all of them. Handle Singapore without me. I'll be unavailable for the foreseeable future. His finger hovered over the send button. This would cause chaos. His stock would probably take a hit. There would be questions, speculation, maybe even calls for his removal as CEO. Everything he'd built over the past 15 years, all the sacrifices he'd made, all the relationships he'd destroyed in now pursuit of success, all of it at risk because he was choosing to stay in Los Angeles and figure out how to be a father. Darius pressed send. The phone immediately started ringing. His CFO, Darius, declined the call and turned off his phone entirely. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and liberating. No emails, no calls, no constant stream of urgent matters demanding his immediate attention. Just him and the approaching dawn, and the knowledge that in a few hours he'd be standing at Sienna's door with no idea what to say. He took a shower, letting the hot water pound against his shoulders while his mind continued its endless loop of rehearsals and recriminations. Changed into the casual clothes he'd worn yesterday, jeans and a button-down that Sienna used to say made him look almost human. Ordered coffee from room service that arrived too hot and tasted like cardboard, but at least gave him something to do with his hands. By 9:30, he was pacing the hotel room like a caged animal. The video call with Dr. Reeves wasn't until 10, and he needed it. Needed someone to tell him he wasn't crazy, that showing up at Sienna's door wasn't going to make everything worse. Or maybe he needed someone to tell him that he was crazy, that he should walk away, that some damage couldn't be undone, and some secrets existed for good reasons. At 9:58, he opened his laptop and logged into the video platform. Dr. Reeves appeared on screen exactly at 10, her kind face showing concern but not judgment. "Talk to me, Darius. What's happened?" And he told her everything. The airport, the babies, following Sienna to Los Angeles, the anger and guilt and desperate need to meet his children, mixed with the fear that he'd just make everything worse. Dr. Reeves listened without interrupting, her expression neutral but attentive. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to happen?" she finally asked. "I want to know my children. I want to be their father." And Sienna, the question hit harder than it should have. "I don't know. I want to understand why she kept this from me. I want her to see that I've changed, that I could be different this time." "Have you changed?" Darius thought about the deleted emails, the canceled acquisition, the phone sitting dead on the nightstand. "I'm trying to change, and actually changing are different things, Darius. And even if you have changed, Sienna has no reason to believe it yet. From her perspective, you're the same man who prioritized work over everything else. The man who made promises and broke them. Why should she trust you with her children, with your children, when you couldn't be trusted with her heart? The words stung because they were true. So, what do I do? You show up, not demanding anything, not asserting your rights, not trying to control the situation. You show up humble and honest, and you tell her you want a chance to prove you can be the father Felix and Iris deserve. And then, you give her time to decide if she's willing to take that risk. What if she says no? Then you respect that and figure out a different path forward, through lawyers if necessary, though I hope it doesn't come to that. But Darius, hear me clearly. You can't force this. You can't bulldoze your way into their lives the way you bulldozed through business deals. That approach destroyed your marriage. Don't let it destroy your relationship with your children before it even begins. Darius rubbed his face with both hands. I'm terrified. I'm going to screw this up. Good. That fear means you understand what's at stake. Let it make you careful, not paralyzed. She leaned closer to the camera. One more thing. Have you thought about why she didn't tell you? Really thought about it from her perspective? She didn't trust me to show up. Yes, and why didn't she trust you? Because I never showed up when it mattered. Because I was always working, always prioritizing the business over us. So, if you want her to trust you now, what needs to be different? The answer was obvious, but saying it out loud felt like jumping off that cliff he'd been standing on since yesterday. I need to actually show up, consistently, even when it's hard, even when work is calling. I need to prove through actions, not words, that they're my priority. Can you do that? Could he? Darius thought about his company, his board, his reputation, everything he'd built his identity around for the past 15 years. And then he thought about Iris grabbing onto things. With her tiny fist, Felix making those small, hungry sounds. Sienna's exhausted shoulders as she managed everything alone. Yes, he said, I can do that. Then go talk to her. Be honest. Be humble. And be prepared for her to need time. The call ended at 10:47. Darius sat staring at the blank screen for another 10 minutes, letting Dr. Reeves's words sink in. Then he stood up, pocketed his wallet and hotel key, and walked out the door before he could change his mind. The drive to Oak Street took 12 minutes. Darius made the cab driver circle the block twice before he could force himself to get out. The apartment building was exactly as Marcus had described. Modest, well-maintained, the kind of place where young families lived when they were just starting out. Children's toys dotted some of the patios. A woman was unloading groceries from her car, a toddler balanced on her hip. This was where Sienna lived, where she'd brought Felix and Iris home from the hospital, where she'd spent the past 4 months learning to be a mother without any help. Unit 2B was on the second floor. Darius climbed the stairs slowly, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. There was a welcome mat with cartoon flowers outside her door. A simple wooden sign that read, "Home is where the heart is." He raised his hand to knock. From inside, he heard it. A baby crying. Then another voice joining in, creating that harmony of infant distress that he'd heard on the plane. And under it, Sienna's voice, stressed and breathless. I know. Just give me a second. I'm coming. Darius knocked before he could lose his nerve. The crying continued. No footsteps approached the door. He knocked again, louder. "Coming?" Sienna's voice cut through the crying. "Just hold on." The door swung open, and there she was. Her hair was in a messy bun, falling apart on one side. Her shirt, an old college sweatshirt he vaguely remembered, had what looked like spit up on the shoulder. She held Felix against her chest while Iris wailed from somewhere inside the apartment. Her eyes were ringed with the kind of exhaustion that went beyond one bad night, the accumulated weight of months without enough sleep. And those eyes widened in shock as she recognized him. All the color drained from her face. Darius? He'd prepared a speech, had rehearsed what to say, but standing here, seeing her like this, overwhelmed and exhausted, and holding their son while their daughter cried, every carefully chosen word evaporated. "Hello, Sienna," was all he managed. The question is, what happens next? Will Sienna let him in, or will that door slam in his face? What would you do in her position? Comment below and let me know. And make sure you're subscribed, because the confrontation you've been waiting for is about to explode in the next chapter. Sienna stared at him like he was a ghost, her face cycling through expressions too quickly for Darius to track. Shock, fear, confusion, and then, as Felix's crying intensified against her shoulder, something harder settled over her features. "You need to leave." Her voice shook, but the words were firm. She started to close the door. Darius put his hand against it, gently, not forcing, just preventing it from shutting completely. "I saw you at the airport yesterday. You and the twins." If possible, she went even paler. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sienna, go away, Darius." Iris's crying reached a new pitch inside the apartment, the kind of desperate sound that made Darius's chest physically hurt, even though he'd never heard it before. Felix was wailing now too, feeding off his sister's distress and his mother's tension. Sienna's whole body was shaking. "Please," he said, softer now. "Please, don't lie to me. Not about this." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. "You need to go. Right now." "Are they mine?" The question hung in the air between them. Impossible to take back. Sienna's composure cracked completely. "Yes," she shouted over the crying. "Yes, they're yours. Are you happy now? You know your secret. Now please, just go." But Darius couldn't move. He looked past her into the apartment, where he could see Iris in a bouncer seat, her small face red and scrunched up with crying. His daughter, right there, so close he could reach her in 3 steps. "Let me help," he said quietly. "Help?" Sienna's laugh came out bitter and broken. "Now you want to help? Where were you 6 months ago, when I was throwing up every morning and trying to hide it during my dissertation defense? Where were you when I went to the hospital alone, terrified something would go wrong, with no one to hold my hand or tell me I was doing okay? Where were you for the first 3 months when I didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time and didn't know if I was doing anything right? When I was so exhausted I could barely function and so scared I was going to somehow break them." Her voice cracked completely. "You don't get to help now." The words hit him like physical blows. Every accusation deserved, every piece of pain he'd caused, laid out in stark detail. But underneath the guilt, anger flickered back to life. "You didn't tell me." The words burst out louder than he'd intended. "How was I supposed to be there when you never told me you were pregnant? Would it have mattered? Sienna shot back. You were never there when we were married. Why would a baby change that? Why would two babies change anything about who you are? They would have. No, she cut him off, tears streaming down her face now, while both babies wailed behind her. No, Darius, you would have promised to change. You would have sworn you'd be different this time, and then the next big deal would have come along, and you'd have missed the first ultrasound because of a conference call. You'd have forgotten about birthing classes because of a meeting in Singapore. You'd have been in New York, closing an acquisition when I went into labor. Don't you see? I couldn't watch you promise to be there and then not show up. And over, while our children learned they couldn't count on you. Two babies, he said automatically, and the moment the words left his mouth, he knew it was the wrong thing to say. Sienna's face hardened into something he'd never seen before. Get out. Sienna, I just meant. I said get out. She was crying openly now, her whole body shaking so hard that Felix's cries turned frantic. You don't get to show up here and act like the victim. You don't get to waltz back into my life just because you accidentally found out about them. We don't need you. We've been fine without you for 4 months, and we'll be fine without you for the rest of their lives. You're clearly not fine, Darius said, and even as the words came out, he knew they were wrong, knew he was making it worse. But the anger had taken over, and he couldn't stop. Look at yourself, Sienna. You're exhausted. You're overwhelmed. You're barely making ends meet in this tiny apartment while you, what? Her voice went dangerously quiet. While you live in our old penthouse and close $1-million deals and convince yourself that money matters more than anything else. Get out of my home, Darius. Get out and don't come back. She stepped back and slammed the door in his face. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. On the other side of that door, all three of them were crying now. Sienna, Felix, and Iris creating a chorus of misery that Darius had caused. His hands curled into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to force the door open, to fix this, to take control and make them listen. But that was exactly what had destroyed everything the first time. His need to control, to fix problems his way, on his timeline, without considering what anyone else needed or wanted. So instead, Darius did something he'd never done before. He sat down on the floor outside her door, his back against the wall, and waited. Inside, the crying gradually shifted. He could hear Sienna moving around, her voice breaking through the dial. Baby's distress with soothing sounds he couldn't quite make out. She was singing something, the same lullaby he'd heard her humming at the airport. Slowly, painfully, slowly, Iris's cries subsided. Then Felix quieted. Then, finally, Sienna's voice faded to silence. Darius checked his watch. 8:47 a.m. He pulled out his phone, still off from last night, and powered it on. Immediately, it exploded with notifications. 63 emails, 22 missed calls, texts from his board, his CFO, his lawyers, all demanding to know what was happening with Singapore, with the company, with him. He ignored all of it and opened a note app instead. Started typing everything he should have said at the door instead of what he'd actually said. I'm sorry for missing everything, for being the kind of husband who made you think I'd be the kind of father you couldn't trust, for making you go through pregnancy and birth, and these first months completely alone. You're right that I would have missed appointments and forgotten classes and probably been in another city when you needed me most. Because that's who I was. But I want to be different now. He stared at the words on his screen. They felt true, but inadequate. How did you apologize for missing the birth of your children? For not being there for the hardest months of someone's life? For being such a failure as a partner that they felt hiding your children was the better option? You couldn't. Not with words. Dr. Reeves had been right about that. Only actions mattered now. An hour passed. Darius's legs cramped from sitting on the floor, but he didn't move. Couldn't move. This was the only thing he could do right now. Just be here, present, even if she didn't want him to be. His phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. Darius declined it and sent a text instead. Take the rest of the week off. I'll handle things from here. Sir, the board is demanding. Let them demand. I'm unavailable. Another hour crept by. The hallway stayed quiet except for occasional sounds from other apartments. Someone's television, a dog barking, life. Continuing normally while Darius sat outside his ex-wife's door trying to figure out how to fix the unfixable. At 11:13, the door opened. Sienna stood there looking even more exhausted than before, both babies asleep in their carriers behind her. She stared down at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. What are you doing? Her voice was flat, drained of all emotion. Waiting to talk to you? Darius stood slowly, his legs protesting the movement. I don't want to talk to you. I know. He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening, but we need to. Please, Sienna. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve, taking in the rumpled clothes, the obvious exhaustion, the way he'd been sitting on her floor for over 2 hours. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, but maybe a crack in the armor. Fine. 5 minutes. She grabbed her keys and the diaper bag. But not here. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Meet me there in 20 minutes. She closed the door before he could respond, leaving him alone in the hallway again. But this time, it felt different. Less like being shut out, and more like being given a chance. 20 minutes. Darius made his way back down the stairs and walked the 2 blocks to the coffee shop she'd mentioned, a small place called Sunnyside Cafe with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The kind of place Sienna would love, comfortable and authentic rather than polished and corporate. He ordered 2 coffees at the counter, remembered that she used to take hers with cream and 2 sugars. Hoped that hadn't changed in 2 years. She arrived exactly 20 minutes later, pushing a double stroller. Both babies were still asleep, tiny miracles bundled in soft blankets. Darius stood as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. She looked surprised by the gesture, then wary as she sat down. I only have an hour before they wake up hungry, she said, accepting the coffee he offered. She took a sip, and her eyes widened slightly. You remembered? I remember everything about you, he said quietly. She looked away, her jaw tightening. You said 5 minutes. Talk. Where did he even start? Darius looked at the babies in the stroller. His children, sleeping peacefully, unaware that their world was about to get complicated, and felt the weight of everything he'd done wrong pressing down on him. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out softer than before, without the accusation that had been there at her door. Sienna's laugh was bitter. Why would I? So you could miss the pregnancy the way you missed everything else in our marriage. So I could watch you promise to come to doctor's appointments and then cancel at the last minute because of a conference call with Tokyo. So I could sit in birthing classes alone while you closed another deal that was more important than preparing for your own children. That's not... He stopped himself. No, you're right. That's exactly what would have happened. The admission seemed to surprise her. She set down her coffee and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd shown up at her door. "Tell me, Darius," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "How many times did you promise to be home for dinner during our last year together?" He was silent, shame burning through him. "How many times did you actually show up?" "Not enough," he admitted. "Barely at all." "I waited," she said, and now the tears were back in her eyes. "Every single time, I waited. I cooked your favorite meals. I set the table. I lit candles like maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time you'd keep your promise. And every time you'd call at the last minute with another excuse. Another urgent meeting. Another opportunity you couldn't miss. Another reason why work was more important than me. I was building something," he said weakly. "For us. For our future." "I didn't want a future with a ghost," Sienna replied. "I wanted a partner. Someone who was actually present. Who cared about more than just the next deal or next acquisition or the next item on the never-ending list of things that mattered more than our marriage. I wanted someone who would choose me sometimes. Just sometimes, Darius. Not always. Not even most of the time. Just once in a while. I wanted to matter more than your company." Every word was a knife, and he deserved every cut. "I loved you." "I know." Her voice cracked completely. "That's what made it so much worse. You loved me, but you loved your work more. And I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't keep breaking my own heart every time you chose a meeting over me." "So, have you ever been in a relationship where you felt like you were always the second choice? Where, no matter what you did, you couldn't compete with something else in your partner's life? Leave a comment and tell me your story, because what Sienna's describing is so real for so many people." The words hung between them in the small coffee shop, heavy with 2 years of accumulated pain. Darius stared down at his untouched coffee, seeing his reflection distorted in the dark liquid. Every excuse he'd ever made to himself, every justification for missing dinners and canceling plans and prioritizing work over his marriage, shattered under the weight of Sienna's honesty. "When did you find out?" he asked quietly. "About the pregnancy." Sienna was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed its warmth. 3 weeks after I left. I'd been feeling sick, exhausted. I thought it was just stress from the divorce, from starting over with nothing. She glanced down at the stroller where Felix and Iris slept. I took a test in the bathroom of a coffee shop. Not even a nice one, just some random place near the apartment I'd rented. And I sat there staring at those 2 lines, absolutely terrified. "You should have called me." "Why?" The challenge in her voice was back. "So you could feel obligated? So you could offer me money and think that solved everything? So you could resent me and the babies for tying you down when all you wanted was to be free to work 80-hour weeks without anyone asking you to come home? It wouldn't have been like that." "Darius," She cut him off, but her voice was gentler now, sad rather than angry. Be honest with yourself. 2 years ago, if I'd called and told you I was pregnant, what would you have done? Really? He opened his mouth to argue, to insist that he would have stepped up, that he would have changed. But if he was truly honest, the kind of brutal honesty this moment demanded, he knew what he would have done. He would have been shocked, probably panicked. He would have told himself he needed to work even harder, to build the company even bigger, because now he had children to provide for. He would have convinced himself that the best thing he could do was ensure financial security, just like his own father had done, and he would have missed every important moment while telling himself he was being responsible. I would have failed them, he said slowly, just like I failed you. The admission seemed to take the wind out of Sienna's anger. She sagged in her chair, looking impossibly tired. I was so scared, Darius. I'd just left you. I was starting over with nothing. I'd given up my share of everything we'd built together, because I just wanted out. And suddenly, I was pregnant, and I had no idea how I was going to manage. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I almost called you. So many times I picked up the phone, but every time I remembered all those broken promises, those missed dinners, all those times you chose your company over us. And I thought, I can't watch my children learn that they don't matter. I can't watch them wait for a father who never shows up. One of the twins, Felix, based on the blue blanket, stirred slightly in his sleep. Both Darius and Sienna's eyes immediately went to him, watching to see if he'd wake. He settled again, and they both exhaled. My father worked 70 hours a week, Darius said quietly. Every week for my entire childhood. He was never home. He missed every birthday, every baseball game, every school play, every single important moment of my life. The memories rose up, bitter and old, but he always said he was doing it for us, to give us a better life than he'd had growing up, to make sure we had opportunities he never got. And you hated him for it, Sienna said softly. It wasn't a question. I swore I'd never be like him. Letting her see the pain in his eyes. I swore that when I had a family in his eyes, I'd actually be there. I'd be present. I'd show up for the people I loved. But you became exactly like him, Sienna finished. I became exactly like him, Darius agreed. The admission felt like exhaling poison. I was so focused on not repeating his financial struggles, on building something stable and successful, that I repeated every other mistake he made. I became the absent father I'd hated, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. Iris stirred now, making small sounds that weren't quite crying but definitely headed in that direction. Sienna reached into the stroller and adjusted her blanket, and Darius found himself leaning forward, wanting to help but not knowing how. Can I hold him? The words came out before he could stop them, desperate and raw. Please, Sienna, let me hold my son. She tensed immediately, every protective instinct going on high alert. Darius, please. He looked at her, letting her see everything. The grief, the desperation, the overwhelming need to touch his child for the first time. I'm not asking for anything else. I'm not demanding rights or threatening lawyers or trying to control this situation. I'm asking you to let me hold my son. Just once. Please." For a long moment, she didn't move. Darius could see her weighing the decision, calculating risks, trying to figure out if this was a trick or manipulation. But then, slowly, she reached into the stroller and carefully lifted Felix out. The baby stirred, but didn't wake, as she placed him in Darius's arms. The weight of his son nearly broke him. Felix was so small, so impossibly perfect, with tiny fingers that curled reflexively, and a small mouth that moved in his sleep like he was dreaming of feeding. His face, Darius could see Sienna's nose, his own chin, a perfect blend of both of them, in this tiny person who'd existed for 4 months without him. "Oh," Darius breathed. Tears he'd been holding back for 2 years, maybe longer, maybe since D first started choosing work over everything else, suddenly spilled over. "Oh, he's perfect." "They both are," Sienna said, her own voice thick with emotion. Darius couldn't take his eyes off Felix. His son. This was his son. And he'd missed 4 months of his life. 4 months of growth and change and small miracles that he could never get back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Felix, to Sienna, or to some version of himself that had made all the wrong choices. "I'm so sorry for everything, for missing this, for being the kind of man you couldn't trust with something this important, for making you think you had to do this alone." Sienna wiped at her own eyes. "I'm sorry, too, for not giving you a chance, for making the decision for both of us. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you would have stepped up. I'll never know because I didn't let you try." Felix yawned, a tiny sound that made both his parents smile through their tears. His small hand found Darius's finger and gripped it with surprising strength. "What happens now?" Darius asked, looking up at Sienna while still cradling Felix. "I don't know," she admitted. "This doesn't fix everything, Darius. You can't just show up and expect to be part of their lives because of biology. They deserve more than that. I know, and I won't let you hurt them." Her voice got fiercer now, the protective mother overriding everything else. "If you're going to be their father, actually be their father, you have to show up. Consistently, reliably. You have to make them your priority. Not just when it's convenient, but all the time. Even when work is calling. Even when there's a deal on the table. Even when it's hard." "I will be," he said with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I swear to you, Sienna, I will be all of those things." "Words are easy, Darius. Then let me prove it with actions." He looked down at Felix, then over at Iris, who was starting to fuss in earnest now. "Give me a chance. Please. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me. But they deserve to have a father who's actually there for them. Let me try to be that person." Sienna studied him for a long time, her expression cycling through doubt and hope and fear. Finally, she said, "One chance. You get one chance, Darius. If you mess this up, if you start prioritizing work over them, if you miss important moments, or make promises you don't keep, that's it. I'll get a custody agreement that protects them, and you'll be limited to supervised visits. I understand. Do you?" She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Because I'm not the same woman you married. I won't sacrifice my children's emotional well-being for your redemption story. I won't let them learn to not count on you the way I learned. if you can't commit to actually being their father, present and consistent and reliable, then it's better if you're not in their lives at all. The stakes laid out so clearly were terrifying. But looking at Felix in his arms, at Iris starting to wake up properly now, Darius knew he'd do whatever it took. "I won't let you down," he promised. "Any of you?" She nodded slowly, then reached into the stroller and lifted out Iris. "Then you should meet your daughter." Darius carefully returned Felix to the stroller and held out his arms for Iris. She was lighter than Felix, squirmier, her dark eyes blinking open as Sienna transferred her. Those eyes, his eyes, looking up at him with innocent curiosity, made something fundamental shift inside Darius's chest. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I know I'm late. I know I missed your first few months, but I'm here now, and I promise, I'm not going anywhere." Iris made a small sound, not quite a cry, but not quite contentment. Then her tiny hand reached up and grabbed his nose. Sienna laughed, actually laughed, the first genuine sound of joy since he'd knocked on her door. "She does that to everyone. It's her thing." "It's perfect," Darius said, his heart so full it hurt. "She's perfect. They're both perfect." And sitting in that small coffee shop, holding his daughter, while his son slept nearby, and his ex-wife watched with cautious hope in her eyes, Darius made a choice. Not with words this time, but with something deeper. He chose them right there in that moment. He chose to be the father Felix and Iris deserved, the partner Sienna had needed him to be. And for the first time in 2 years, maybe in his entire life, he felt like he might actually know what mattered most. So here's what I want to know. Do you believe people can really change? Do you think Darius can actually be the father he's promising to be? Or is Sienna setting herself up for more heartbreak? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because the journey these three are about to go on will test everything they thought they knew about second chances. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The diaper exploded. Darius stood frozen in Sienna's living room at 2:17 a.m., holding Felix at arm's length while yellow liquid dripped down both their shirts. The baby was screaming, that high-pitched wail that meant he was genuinely upset, and Darius had absolutely no idea what to do. "Sienna," his voice came out panicked, louder than he'd intended in the quiet apartment. She appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, hair wild from sleep, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. She took one look at the situation, and despite the exhaustion written across her face, she almost smiled. "Almost? Welcome to parenthood," she said, taking Felix from him. "Go wash up. There are clean clothes in the bathroom closet. Second shelf." This was day 3 of Darius showing up at her apartment. Day 3 of trying to prove he meant what he'd said in that coffee shop. Day 3 of discovering that wanting to be a father and actually knowing how to be one were completely different things. He'd changed exactly 0 diapers successfully so far. His record was 0 for 11, and this disaster made it 0 for 12. In the bathroom, Darius stripped off his ruined shirt and scrubbed at his skin with a washcloth. His reflection in the mirror looked nothing like the polished CEO who'd graced magazine covers. This version had dark circles under his eyes, 3 days of stubble, and baby vomit in his hair from an earlier incident he'd rather forget. His phone, still sitting on the bathroom counter where he'd left it yesterday, showed 47 new messages. The board was threatening emergency action. His CFO had resigned. Stock prices were dropping. Everything he'd built over 15 years was crumbling because he'd walked away without explanation. Darius turned the phone face down without reading any of the messages. When he returned to the living room in a borrowed shirt that was too small and smelled like Sienna's laundry detergent, she was already settling Felix back into his crib. The baby had stopped crying, soothed by practiced hands that knew exactly what he needed. "You have to support the legs when you lift," Sienna said quietly, not looking at him. "And check the diaper before you pick them up. If it feels heavy, it's probably about to leak." "I'm sorry. I should have." "Jane?" She finally turned to face him, and in the dim light from the hallway, he could see how tired she really was. "It takes practice. Nobody gets it right the first dozen times. How do you do this alone?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Every night, every day, just you and them, and no help." Something flickered across her face. Pride mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something that might have been loneliness. "You figure it out. You have to." Iris started fussing in her crib. That preliminary sound that meant crying was about 30 seconds away. Sienna moved toward her automatically. But Darius stepped forward first. "Let me try." He looked at Sienna, asking permission. "Please, I need to learn." She hesitated, then nodded. "If she's crying, she's probably hungry. There are bottles already made in the fridge. Warm them in the bottle warmer for 90 seconds. Then test the temperature on your wrist before you feed her." Darius followed her instructions exactly, hyper-focused on every detail. 90 seconds in the warmer. Test on wrist. Too hot. Wait 30 seconds. Test again. Perfect. Return to living room, where Iris's fussing had escalated to proper crying. He lifted her from the crib, supporting her head and legs this time, and settled into the rocking chair Sienna pointed to. Iris looked up at him with dark, suspicious eyes, her tiny face scrunched with displeasure. She didn't know him yet. To her, he was just the stranger who'd shown up 3 days ago and kept making mistakes. "Hey, sweetheart," he murmured, offering her the bottle. "I know I'm not as good at this as your mom, but I'm trying. I promise, I'm trying." Iris latched onto the bottle after a moment of resistance, her little hands coming up to grip it. The crying stopped, replaced by the soft sounds of feeding. Darius let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Sienna watched from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "You're getting better." "I'm getting less terrible," he corrected. "There's a difference. Less terrible is progress." She moved into the room and sank onto the couch with a sigh that seemed to come from her bones. Most fathers don't even try this hard. Most fathers didn't miss the first 4 months. The words came out bitter, but not accusatory. Just factual, a statement of loss he was still trying to process. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds Iris feeding and the occasional car passing outside. Through the window, Darius could see the first hints of dawn lightening the sky. Another night survived. Another small victory in the war of learning to be present. Have you ever tried to learn something completely new while exhausted and terrified of failing? That's where Darius is right now. Every moment feeling like a test he's not prepared for. Drop a comment if you've ever been thrown into the deep end of something you had no idea how to do. Why are you really here? Sienna asked suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but the question cut through the peaceful moment like a knife. Darius looked up from Iris. What do you mean? I mean, you canceled a $300 million deal. You've been sleeping on my couch for 3 nights. Your company is falling apart. Yes, I've seen the news. And you're sitting here at 2 a.m. learning to feed a baby you didn't even know existed a week ago. She leaned forward, her eyes searching his face. So I'm asking, why? What's really going on here? I told you, I want to be their father. That's what you said. But people don't just change overnight, Darius. Not really. Not fundamentally. Her voice got softer, sadder. So what happens when the newness wears off? When being here stops feeling like redemption and starts feeling like obligation? When some amazing opportunity comes along and you have to choose between your children and your company? It was a fair question. The question, really. The one that had probably kept her from telling him about the pregnancy in the first place. I don't know, he said honestly. Iris had finished her bottle and was starting to fall asleep against his chest, tiny and warm and trusting in a way that made his throat tight. I can't promise I'll never mess up. I can't promise there won't be moments where I'm tempted to fall back into old patterns, but I can promise that I'm going to try. Every single day, I'm going to choose them. Choose you. Choose this. You chose work for 2 years straight when we were married. I know the admission hurt, but it was true, and I lost everything that mattered because of it. I'm not making that mistake again. Sienna was quiet for a long moment, studying him in the dim light. Your CFO quit? Your board is talking about forcing you out. Your stock dropped 11% in 3 days. Don't you care about any of that? Of course I care. Darius carefully stood, moving to place Iris back in her crib. She settled without waking, her small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. I spent 15 years building that company. But you know what I realized sitting in that airport? Watching you with our children I didn't even know existed? None of it matters. Not the money. Not the success. Not the recognition. None of it matters if I don't have people to share it with. That's easy to say now, when everything feels new and important. Sienna stood too, moving to check on Felix. But what about 6 months from now? A year? When the late nights stop being an adventure and start being just exhausting? When you've missed enough sleep that you can't think straight? When there's a deal on the table that could change everything for your company? Then I hire someone else to close it. Darius moved closer to her, not touching but near enough that he could see the doubt in her eyes. Sienna, I'm restructuring everything, the whole company. I'm hiring a CEO to handle day-to-day operations. I'm going to be chairman, involved in strategy but not consumed by it. Because you were right. I was married to my company. I'm getting a divorce. She blinked, surprise flickering across her face. You're serious? Completely? He pulled out his phone, opening his email for the first time in days, showed her the draft message he'd been working on. I'm announcing it Monday. New CEO, new structure, new priorities. I'm not abandoning the company, but I'm not letting it consume my life anymore either. Sienna read the email, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. This could destroy everything you've built, or it could save it. Either way, It's necessary. He put the phone away. I'm not the same man you divorced, Sienna. Or maybe I am, but I'm choosing to be different now. Choosing to build a life instead of just a legacy. I want to believe you, she whispered. God, Darius, I want to believe you so badly. But I'm terrified. Terrified of letting you in and watching you leave again. Terrified of letting Felix and Iris love you and then having to explain why Daddy's always gone. Terrified that this is just temporary and 6 months from now, I'll be alone. Again, except this time, with 2 children who know what they're missing. The pain in her voice broke something in him. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. She didn't pull away. I can't prove it to you with words, he said quietly. I can only prove it by showing up, every day, even when it's hard, even when I'm exhausted, even when work is screaming for my attention. I just have to keep choosing you, choosing them, until one day, maybe you'll believe that this is real. She stared at their joined hands for a long moment. Your company's board meeting is Monday morning. I know you should go. Present your restructuring plan in person. Answer their questions. Do it right, so there's no confusion about what you're doing or why. She looked up at him. I'll be okay here for a few days. I don't want to leave. I know. But if you're really going to make this work, if you're going to balance being a father and running a company, you need to actually do both. Her voice wavered slightly. Come back. When you say you're coming back, actually come back. It was a test, maybe a fair one. Darius squeezed her hand gently. I'll leave Sunday night, handle the board meeting Monday morning, and I'll be back Monday evening, 6 p.m. I'll text you when I board the plane and when I land. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He met her eyes, letting her see how serious he was. You need to know you can count on me. So I'm going to show you over and over until you believe it. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through the windows of the small apartment. In their cribs, Felix and Iris slept peacefully, unaware of the tentative agreement being made above them, unaware that their father was trying to become someone worthy of them. Sienna pulled her hand back slowly. I need coffee. I'll make it. Darius headed toward the kitchen, then paused. Sienna, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it. No, she agreed quietly. You don't, but maybe they do. Maybe they deserve to have a father who's actually present. So don't mess this up, Darius. Please don't mess this up. He nodded and went to make coffee, the weight of her trust and his children's future pressing down on his shoulders. Monday would be the first real test. Could he go back to New York, handle his business, and actually return when he said he would? Or would he get pulled back into the old patterns, the old priorities, the old version of himself that had destroyed everything? Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, Darius was determined to pass a test that actually mattered. So what do you think? Can Darius really change? Or is Sienna setting herself up for more heartbreak? Have you ever given someone a second chance and regretted it? Or been glad you did? Let me know in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed because the real test is coming. And you won't want to miss whether he passes or fails. The boardroom felt like foreign territory. Darius stood at the head of the table Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, looking at 12 faces that ranged from concerned to hostile. His CFO's empty chair sat like an accusation. The company's general counsel had a resignation letter sitting on the table in front of him. The air was thick with tension and the unspoken question, "What the hell is going on?" "Gentlemen, ladies," Darius began, his voice steady despite the fact that he'd slept maybe 3 hours on the red-eye flight. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I know the past week has been chaotic and confusing. I'm here to explain everything and present a new direction for Ashford Industries." Richard Chen, the longest-serving board member, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "A new direction? Darius, you abandoned a $300 million acquisition without explanation. Your CFO quit. Our stock is down 14%. What possible explanation could justify this level of chaos? I became a father." The words came out clear and firm. 4 days ago, I discovered I have 4-month-old twins I knew nothing about, a son and a daughter, and I made a choice to prioritize them over a business deal. Silence crashed through the room like a wave. Several board members exchanged glances. Patricia Rodriguez, head of the Compensation Committee, spoke first. "Congratulations," she said carefully. "That's wonderful news. But surely you could have handled both? We've had executives manage personal situations and business obligations before." "I could have," Darius agreed. "I could have closed the Singapore deal and flown out to meet my children afterward. I could have put them in a box labeled personal life and kept them separate from my work. But that's exactly what destroyed my marriage and caused their mother to feel she couldn't trust me with the information that they existed in the first place." He pulled up a presentation on the screen behind him. "For the past week, I've been working with our executive team on a comprehensive restructuring plan. I'm proposing we hire a CEO to handle day-to-day operations. I'll remain as chairman, focused on long-term strategy and major decisions, but I will no longer be working 80-hour weeks or treating this company as my entire life." "That's insane," Richard said flatly. "You are this company, Darius. You built it from nothing. Your vision, your leadership, that's what investors believe in. If you step back, our value will plummet." "Our value has already dropped because I disappeared without explanation," Darius countered. "But it will recover. And more importantly, we'll be building something sustainable instead of something that depends entirely on whether I'm willing to sacrifice everything else in my life." The general counsel, Marcus Wright, different Marcus than his former assistant, spoke up. "Who did you have in mind for CEO?" "Jennifer Park. She's been our COO for 6 years. She knows the company inside and out. She's respected by the team, and she's been essentially running operations, while I've been focused on acquisitions anyway." Darius pulled up Jennifer's credentials and track record. "She's more than qualified, and frankly, she's been doing half the job already." "And Singapore?" Patricia asked. That deal represented major expansion into Asian markets. Singapore was always risky. We would have overpaid, and integration would have been a nightmare. Darius had done this analysis on the plane, breaking down all the reasons he'd been pushing for the acquisition. "We pursued it because I was obsessed with growth at any cost. But Jennifer's already identified 3 smaller opportunities in the region that make more strategic sense and don't require me to personally negotiate for 6 months." Richard shook his head. "This is about more than one deal, Darius. This is about whether you're committed to this company or whether you going to let personal matters derail everything we've built. With respect, Richard, I am letting personal matters derail everything we built, deliberately, because what we built wasn't sustainable. Darius met the older man's eyes without flinching. I've been heading toward a heart attack or a breakdown for years. I've sacrificed every relationship, every moment of personal happiness, every part of life that makes it worth living. And for what? So our stock price could be 10 points higher. So I could prove to my dead father that I was worth something? The brutal honesty seemed to surprise the room. Patricia leaned forward. Darius, we appreciate your candor, but you're asking us to fundamentally change the structure of a multi-billion-dollar company because you've decided you want work-life balance. That's not how this works. Then maybe it should be. Darius pulled up the next slide, statistics on CEO burnout, executive suicide rates, divorce rates among top executives. Look at these numbers. Look at what we're doing to ourselves and calling it success. I'm proposing we build something different. A company that values sustainability over growth at any cost. That believes executives can be effective without sacrificing their humanity. That sounds nice in a TED Talk, Richard said dryly. But investors want results. They'll get them. Jennifer's plan for the next fiscal year projects 15% growth, which is actually higher than my projections were. Darius pulled up the financials. The difference is it's sustainable growth, strategic, not dependent on one person working himself to death. The debate went on for 2 hours. Board members raised concerns, asked questions, pushed back against the proposal. But slowly, Darius could see some of them coming around. Patricia asked about succession planning and risk management. Another board member wanted details on how major decisions would be made. The general counsel questioned the legal implications. These were good questions, serious questions, the kind that meant they were actually considering it, instead of just dismissing it outright. At 11:15, Richard called for a vote on moving forward with formal evaluation of the restructuring proposal. 7 voted yes. 4 voted no. 1 abstained. It wasn't approval, but it was enough to keep the conversation going. We'll reconvene Wednesday with Jennifer present, Patricia announced. If she's going to be CEO, the board needs to hear directly from her about her vision and plans. Darius nodded. I'll have her here. Thank you for considering this. As the board members filed out, Richard held back. Can I speak with you privately? They moved to Darius's office, or what used to feel like his office, but now felt more like a museum of his old life. Photos of deal closings and industry awards. Shelves full of trophies for being named CEO of the Year, Innovator of the Year, every year. All of it felt hollow now. I've known you since you were 26 years old, Richard said, settling into one of the leather chairs. Watched you build this, from a startup to what it is today. And I've never seen you like this. Like what? Uncertain, conflicted. Actually questioning whether growth and success are worth the cost. Richard studied him carefully. What happened to you, Darius? Really? Darius thought about Iris grabbing his nose, about Felix falling asleep in his arms during a 2 a.m. feeding, about Sienna's exhausted face and the weight of 4 months she'd carried alone. I saw what I was becoming, he said quietly, or maybe what I'd already become. And I didn't like it. My ex-wife was so convinced I'd be an absent father that she hid my children from me, rather than let me prove her right. That's not The kind of man I want to be. So you're walking away. I'm not walking away. I'm trying to find balance before it's too late. Darius leaned against his desk. Richard, you have 3 kids, right? How much of their childhood did you miss? The older man was quiet for a moment. Too much. My daughter got married last year. I'd met her fiancé exactly twice before the wedding. She didn't even ask me to walk her down the aisle. Said she didn't want me there just for show. The pain in Richard's voice was old and deep. Darius recognized it because he was staring at his own future if he didn't change. I'm sorry, Darius said. Me too. But that's the price of success, isn't it? That's what we tell ourselves. Richard stood up slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. But Darius, understand something. If you do this, if you really commit to this new path, you can't go back. You can't rebuild your reputation as a workaholic CEO who will do anything for the company. You'll be the guy who chose his kids over his career. Some people will respect that. Others will see it as weakness. Though, and you're okay with that? Darius thought about Felix and Iris sleeping in their cribs. About Sienna's warning. When you say you're coming back, actually come back. I have to be, he said. Richard nodded slowly. Then I hope it works out for you. I really do. Because if it doesn't, if those kids end up resenting you anyway, or if your ex doesn't let you into their lives, no matter what you do, you'll have given up everything for nothing. The words haunted Darius on the flight back to Los Angeles that evening. What if Richard was right? What if he was sacrificing his company, his reputation, everything he'd built, and it still wasn't enough? What if Sienna never fully trusted him? What if Felix and Iris grew up and still felt like he'd missed too much? But then his phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. Iris said something that sounded like data today. Probably just babbling. But I thought you'd want to know. And attached was a video of Iris in her bouncer, her little mouth forming sounds while she grabbed at a toy. It was probably meaningless. 4-month-olds didn't really talk yet. But the fact that Sienna had sent it, had thought to share this small moment with him, felt like progress. On my way, he texted back. Landing at 5:30. Should be there by 6, like I promised. Okay, came the reply. And then, a moment later, drive safe. It was such a small thing, 2 words, but they carried weight because they meant she was expecting him, counting on him, letting herself believe, maybe just a little bit, that he'd actually show up. Darius made it to her apartment at 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes early. When Sienna opened the door, he could see the surprise flicker across her face. Not that he was there, but that he was there when he'd said he would be. How did it go? She asked, stepping aside to let him in. Board's considering it. We vote Wednesday. He moved immediately to the babies, who were both awake and playing on a mat on the floor. Felix saw him and kicked his legs, that excited baby movement that might have been recognition or might have been coincidence. Either way, it made Darius's heart swell. And if they say no, then I resign and start something new. He picked up Felix, lifting him high and making the baby giggle. But I don't think they'll say no. Not once they hear Jennifer's plans. Sienna watched him with the babies, something shifting in her expression. You really meant it. About restructuring everything. I told you I did. I know, but I didn't believe it. Not really. I thought you'd get back to New York and realize how much you were giving up, and she trailed off. And come back making excuses about why you needed to give me more time. Darius guessed. He set Felix down carefully and turned to face her. Sienna, I'm not that man anymore, or I'm trying not to be. It's going to take time for me to prove it, but I'm going to show up every time until you believe it. She bit her lip, fighting tears. Do you want to stay for dinner? It's just pasta, nothing fancy, but I'd love to. He smiled. Can I help cook? You cook now. I'm learning. Badly. But I'm learning, and watching Sienna's face break into a tentative smile. The first real smile she'd given him since he'd showed up at her door. Darius knew he'd made the right choice. The board could vote however they wanted. His company could thrive or fail. His reputation could take whatever hit it took. None of it mattered as much as this. As being here, as being present for these small, ordinary moments that made up a life worth living. But the real question is, will the board approve his plan? And more importantly, will Sienna ever fully trust him again? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the next chapter is where everything comes together, or falls apart. The bottle warmer beeped at 3:47 a.m., and Darius was already moving. 3 weeks had passed since the board meeting. 3 weeks of splitting his time between New York and Pasadena. 3 weeks of learning that being a father meant functioning on 4 hours of sleep and considering that a good night. 3 weeks of slowly, carefully, building something that looked like trust. He lifted Felix from the crib before the crying could escalate and wake Iris. The routine was second nature now. Warm the bottle, test the temperature, settle into the rocking chair. Feed while humming quietly, so Sienna could sleep a little longer. She was finally letting herself rest when he was here. Finally believing he'd handle the night shift without needing her to supervise. Felix looked up at him in the dim light, his small hand gripping Darius's finger while he ate. These quiet 3 a.m. moments had become Darius's favorite part of the day. No distractions, no demands, just him and his son, and the profound peace of being exactly where he needed to be. His phone buzzed silently on the side table. A text from Jennifer. Board approved the quarterly report. Stock up 3% on the news. You were right about the regional strategy. Darius smiled and set the phone back down without responding. It could wait until morning. Everything could wait. Felix finished his bottle, and Darius lifted him to his shoulder, patting his back gently until he burped. The baby's head settled against his neck, warm and trusting, and Darius felt that now familiar tightness in his chest that meant overwhelming love, mixed with the grief of knowing how much he'd already missed. Your mom took you for your 4-month checkup when I didn't even know you existed, he whispered. But I'll be there for your 6th, and everyone after that. I promise. Felix made a small sound that might have been agreement, or might have been sleep. Darius stood carefully and placed him back in the crib, covering him with the soft blue blanket Sienna's mother had made before she'd passed away. Felix's eyes were already closed, drifting back to sleep. Darius turned to find Sienna standing in the doorway, watching. She wore one of his old t-shirts that she'd claimed somewhere during the past 3 weeks, her hair wild from sleep. "You're getting good at this," she said softly. "I had a good teacher." He moved toward her, keeping his voice low so they wouldn't wake either baby. "Did we wake you?" "No, I'm not used to sleeping through feedings yet. My body still wakes up automatically." She glanced at the clock. "You have an early call with Tokyo, don't you? You should go back to sleep." I moved it to 9. Jennifer's handling the preliminary discussion anyway. He followed her into the kitchen, where she was making tea. I told them I'm not taking calls before 8 a.m. Pacific anymore. Sienna poured hot water over tea bags, her movements automatic. "How's the transition going?" "Really?" It was a question she asked regularly now, like she was testing to make sure his commitment hadn't wavered. Darius didn't mind. He understood that trust had to be earned through repetition, through showing up over and over until the pattern became undeniable. "Jennifer's amazing. Better at some aspects of operations than I ever was." Honestly, he accepted the cup of tea she handed him. The board was skeptical at first, but the third quarter numbers shut most of them up. "We're actually more profitable now than when I was killing myself trying to micromanage everything." "And you're okay with that? With not being the one running everything?" "I'm more than okay with it." Darius leaned against the counter, studying her face in the soft kitchen light. "I spent 15 years building a company. Now I'm trying to build something harder, a family, a life. The company will be fine without me as CEO. Felix and Iris won't." Sienna was quiet for a moment, staring into her tea. "You flew back from New York twice last week, just to be here for bedtime." I told them I'd be here for bedtime, so I was here for bedtime. That's not normal, Darius. Most fathers didn't spend the first 4 months of their children's lives not knowing they existed. He set down his cup. "I'm not trying to be a normal father. I'm trying to be the father I should have been from the beginning." She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. Not quite love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The door opening a crack after being locked tight for so long. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared that I'm letting myself believe this is real. And then one day, you'll get pulled back into the old patterns, and I'll be alone again. Except this time, Felix and Iris will know what they're missing." Darius moved closer, but didn't touch her, giving her space even though every instinct wanted to close the distance between them. "What would it take for you to believe this is permanent? Not just real for right now, but actually permanent?" "I don't know. Time, I guess. More time." She wrapped both hands around her cup like she needed its warmth. "It's only been 3 weeks, Darius. 3 weeks is nothing compared to the 2 years you spent choosing work over everything else. Then I'll give you time. All the time you need." He picked up his own cup again. "But Sienna, I need you to know something. This isn't just about proving I can be a good father to Felix and Iris. This is also about showing you that I learned from what we lost, that I understand now what I threw away when I let my obsession with the company destroy our marriage." Her breath caught slightly. "Darius, I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking for us to try again or rebuild what we had. I know I destroyed that beyond repair." He made himself look at her directly, letting her see the truth in his eyes. I'm just saying that being here, being part of their lives, has also meant being around you, seeing who you've become, the strength you've developed, going through everything alone, the incredible mother you are. And I find myself falling for you all over again, except this time, I actually know what I have. What I'd be losing if I messed this up. Sienna set down her cup with shaking hands. That's not fair. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true, because I spent 2 years getting over you. 2 years convincing myself that you were exactly who you showed me. You were someone who would always choose work over everything else. And now you're here, and you're different. And I don't know if I can trust it. I don't know if I can trust you. Her voice broke. Or maybe I don't know if I can trust myself not to fall for you again and end up right back where I was. This time, Darius did close the distance. He reached out slowly and took her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, he said quietly. I can't promise I'll always get it right, or that I won't occasionally slip into old habits without realizing it. But I can promise that I'll keep trying, that I'll keep showing up, that I'll keep choosing you and Felix and Iris over everything else, every single day, until the day I die. That's a big promise. It's the only one that matters. Tears were sliding down her face now. I want to believe you. You have no idea how much I want to believe you. Then, believe me. He lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. Feel that? That's me, terrified I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing and lose you all over again. That's me. More scared than I've ever been of any business deal, or negotiation, or hostile takeover. Because this actually matters. You matter, they matter. And I can't go back to the life I had before, where all I had was money and success and absolutely nothing else. Sienna was crying in earnest now, and Darius pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself cry for everything they'd lost and might possibly be finding again. I'm scared, she whispered against his shirt. Me too. They stood like that in the kitchen while the sky outside gradually lightened from black to gray to the first hints of pink, holding each other, not promising anything beyond this moment, but letting this moment be enough. When Iris started fussing in the other room, they broke apart slowly. Sienna wiped her eyes and laughed shakily. I look terrible, she said. You look beautiful. And he meant it. She'd never been more beautiful than right now, exhausted and tear-stained and vulnerable, in a way she hadn't let herself be with him in years. I'll get Iris, she said. Let me. You finish your tea. He left her in the kitchen and went to lift his daughter from her crib. Iris looked up at him with those serious dark eyes and reached for his face. He caught her hand and kissed her small palm. Your mom's scared I'm going to leave again, he told her quietly. So you and Felix are going to have to help me prove I'm staying. Deal? Iris made a sound that he chose to interpret as agreement. By the time he returned to the kitchen with Iris, Sienna had composed herself and was making bottles. They moved around each other easily now. A routine developed through repetition. He held Iris while Sienna prepared formula. She warmed the bottles while he changed the baby's diaper. They worked as a team without needing to discuss it. I have to be in New York Wednesday and Thursday this week, Darius said as they settled on the couch to feed the babies. But I'll be back Thursday night. And next week, I'm clear. Until Tuesday. Okay, Sienna fed Felix, watching him eat with that intense mother's focus that never quite faded. Jennifer called me yesterday. Darius looked up, surprised. She did? She wanted to know if I'd be willing to consult for your company. Apparently, you're launching some new initiative around family-friendly policies, and she thought having a child psychologist's perspective would be valuable. Sienna's tone was careful, neutral. Did you know about this? No. That was all, Jennifer. He smiled slightly, though I'm not surprised. She's been pushing for better parental leave policies since before I stepped back. Now she actually has the authority to implement them. It would be good money. And I could do most of it remotely. She hesitated, but I don't want you to think I'm saying yes, just because we're... I know you're not, he interrupted gently. Whatever you decide about the consulting work has nothing to do with us. If you want the job, take it because it's a good opportunity. If you don't, turn it down. I won't be offended either way. She nodded slowly. I think I'm going to say yes. It would give me more financial stability. And honestly, the work sounds interesting. Good. You'll be great at it. They finished feeding the babies, and Darius burped Iris while Sienna handled Felix. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through the windows of the apartment. It was Tuesday, which meant Darius would work from Sienna's couch today, taking video calls while babies napped, and helping with feedings between meetings. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the corner office with the view of Manhattan. But it was real, and it mattered, and it felt more like success than anything he'd achieved in 15 years of building a billion-dollar company. His phone buzzed with a reminder about his 9 a.m. call. Darius glanced at it, then set it aside to help Sienna get both babies settled for their morning nap. Your call, she started. Can wait 5 minutes. He placed Iris in her crib and covered her carefully. This is more important, and watching Sienna's face as she realized he meant it, that he was choosing this moment over his work, over and over, building a pattern she could finally start to trust. Darius knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The question wasn't whether he could keep this up. It was whether Sienna would eventually let herself believe he would. That answer would only come with time. So here's what I need to know from you. Do you think Sienna should let him all the way back in? Should she risk getting hurt again? Or should she keep protecting herself? Drop your honest opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the final chapters are going to show whether this second chance works out, or if some damage really is permanent. 6 months. That's how long it took for everything to either fall apart or come together, and Darius still wasn't sure which one was happening as he stood in the pediatrician's office holding a screaming Iris while the doctor examined Felix. He's perfectly healthy, Dr. Patel said over the crying. Weight gain is excellent. Development right on track. You're doing a great job. Sienna looked like she might cry from relief. Are you sure? He's been so fussy lately. And I was worried. Completely normal. Some babies are just more vocal than others. The doctor smiled as she moved to examine Iris, who immediately stopped screaming the moment she was in someone else's arms. This one, however, knows exactly what she wants and how to get it. Darius and Sienna exchanged a look, The kind of look that parents share when they both recognize the truth in what someone's said about their child. Iris did indeed know exactly how to manipulate any situation to her advantage. At 10 months old, she was already displaying a stubborn streak that reminded Darius uncomfortably of himself. Both babies are thriving. Dr. Patel continued as she finished her exam. You're clearly providing a stable, loving environment. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Whatever they were doing. Darius thought about that as they loaded the babies back into their car seats and headed to Sienna's apartment. 6 months of showing up. 6 months of keeping every promise. 6 months of slowly, carefully, rebuilding trust one day at a time. Jennifer had been CEO for 5 months now, and the company was actually doing better than when he'd been running it into the ground with his obsessive work habits. The board had stopped questioning his decision. Stock prices had recovered and then exceeded their previous highs. Turned out a rested strategic chairman was more valuable than an exhausted CEO who tried to control everything. Darius had moved to Pasadena 3 months ago, getting his own apartment 2 blocks from Sienna's. Close enough to be present, but far enough to respect her boundaries. He spent every morning and evening at her place, helping with the babies, sharing meals, building the kind of domestic routine he'd never thought he'd want. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite acknowledging it, they'd started falling in love again, or maybe finishing the process of falling that had been interrupted by his failure to be present 2 years ago. "Felix needs a nap," Sienna said as they pulled into her parking lot. "And I need to finish that report for Jennifer. I'll put him down. You work." Darius had gotten good at translating baby cues. Felix's particular fussiness meant overtired, while Iris's meant understimulated. Completely different problems, requiring completely different solutions. Inside the apartment, Sienna disappeared into her makeshift home office while Darius handled both babies. Felix went down easily, exhausted from the doctor's visit. Iris required more persuasion. A story, a song, 3 false attempts before she finally gave up and let sleep take her. Darius emerged from the nursery to find Sienna at her desk, staring at her laptop with a strange expression on her face. "That be thing okay?" he asked. "Jennifer wants me to fly to New York next month. Some kind of big presentation to the board about the family initiative." She looked up at him. "But that's 3 days away from the babies. I've never left them overnight before. I'll be here. With them. We'll be fine." "I know you will." "That's not—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "I'm being ridiculous. Of course you can handle them for 3 days." But he could hear the unspoken word. But what if something goes wrong? What if one of them gets sick? Or there's an emergency, or then I'll handle it. Like I've been handling things for the past 6 months. Darius moved into the office and crouched beside her chair. "Sienna, I know you're used to doing everything yourself, but you don't have to anymore. You can go to New York and trust that I'll take care of our children. Because that's what I do now. That's who I am." She stared at him for a long moment. "You really have changed, haven't you? I've been trying to tell you that. I know, but I think I'm finally starting to believe it." She reached out and touched his face, her hand gentle against his jaw. "You've been here every single day for 6 months. You've never missed a pediatrician appointment or a feeding schedule or bedtime. You restructured your entire life and career, and you did it without any guarantee that I'd ever let you back in. I didn't do it to get you back. I did it because it was the right thing to do. for Felix and Iris, for myself. He covered her hand with his own, but I won't lie. I hoped that maybe if I proved I'd changed, if I showed you that I learned from losing you the first time, that maybe you'd give me another chance. Darius, I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just telling you what I hope for. He stood up slowly. Take the New York trip. Go present your work to the board and show them why family-friendly policies matter. I'll hold down the fort here. And when you come back, maybe we can talk about what this is becoming. Sienna nodded, blinking back tears. Okay, the next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Sienna stressed about leaving the babies. Darius assured her repeatedly that he had everything under control. Felix and Iris continued growing and changing so fast that every day brought some new development. Iris pulling herself up on furniture. Felix babbling sounds that almost resembled words. The day Sienna left for New York, she checked everything 3 times. The pediatrician's number is on the fridge, and the backup formula is in the cabinet next to the sink. I know, Sienna. I've lived this routine for 6 months. He kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become natural somewhere along the way. No, knock them dead. We'll be here when you get back. She hugged both babies, gave Darius 17 more instructions he already knew, and finally left for the airport. The apartment felt different without her, quieter, despite the babies. Darius had gotten so used to her presence, the way she hummed while making bottles, the sound of her laughter when Iris did something particularly stubborn, the feeling of partnership that had developed as they'd learned to parent together. But he'd meant what he'd said. He had this under control. Day 1 went smoothly. Feedings on schedule. Naps mostly successful. No major disasters. He sent Sienna photos and videos throughout the day, showing her that everything was fine. Day 2 was harder. Felix developed a low fever that sent Darius into near panic before. He remembered Dr. Patel saying teething could cause mild fevers. He monitored it carefully, gave the appropriate dose of infant medicine, and the fever broke by evening. He texted Sienna an update, but downplayed his initial panic. Day 3. Iris decided she no longer needed naps. This discovery led to a particularly challenging afternoon where she screamed bloody murder every time Darius tried to put her down. Felix, sensing his sister's distress, joined in the crying. For 2 straight hours, Darius walked the apartment with one screaming baby, while the other cried from her crib, trying everything he could think of to calm them. Finally, in desperation, he put them both in the double stroller and went for a walk. The motion and fresh air worked like magic. Both babies fell asleep within 10 minutes. Darius texted a photo to Sienna. Sometimes you just have to try something different. We're all good here. Her response came immediately. You're amazing. I'll be home tomorrow. I miss you all. I miss you all. Not just the babies. All of them, including him. That night, after both babies were asleep, and Darius had collapsed on the couch, with exhaustion that went bone deep, he thought about how far they'd all come. 6 months ago, Sienna couldn't trust him to be alone with the babies for an hour. Now she'd left him for 3 days, and despite some challenging moments, they'd survived. More than survived. They'd thrived. His phone rang. Sienna's face appeared on the screen. Hey, he answered. Shouldn't you be at some fancy dinner with the board? I left early, told them I needed to check on my family. Her voice sounded strange. Darius, I've been thinking about us, about what we're doing, about what I want. She paused. When I get home tomorrow, can we talk? Really talk about where this is going? His heart started racing. Of course. Whatever you need. Guy? Good. He could hear the smile in her voice. Thank you for taking such good care of them, for proving I can trust you, for being exactly who you said you'd be. Always, he promised. After they hung up, Darius sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel hope. Real hope for the first time since he'd seen her in that airport terminal 7 months ago. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to figure this out after all. But then again, maybe he was getting ahead of himself. Maybe she just wanted to establish clearer boundaries or discuss custody arrangements or have some other practical conversation. Only one way to find out. Tomorrow, when she came home, they'd talk. And whatever she decided, whatever she needed, he'd respect it. Because that's what love meant now. Not demanding his way, or trying to control the outcome, but showing up and letting her make the choice about what came next. So what do you think she's going to say? Is she ready to give him another real chance? Or is she going to keep things as they are? Make your predictions in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed because the final chapter is going to answer all your questions about whether love really can get a second chance. Sienna's key turned in the lock at 4:47 p.m., 17 minutes earlier than her flight schedule suggested she'd arrive. Darius was on the floor with both babies, all 3 of them covered in what used to be mashed sweet potatoes before Iris had decided throwing was more fun than eating. The door opened, and Sienna stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Felix had sweet potato in his hair. Iris was laughing maniacally, while smearing more on Darius's shirt. The kitchen behind them looked like a food bomb had gone off. And Sienna started laughing. Actually laughing. The kind of full-bodied joy Darius hadn't heard from her in years. "Welcome home," he said, trying and failing to wipe sweet potato off his face. "As you can see, we have everything totally under control." She dropped her bags and came straight to them, kneeling on the floor and kissing both babies. Then, without hesitation, she kissed Darius too. Quick, impulsive, but definitely intentional. He froze, not quite believing it had happened. Sienna pulled back and looked at him, her eyes bright. "We need to talk. But first, let me help you clean up this disaster." Together they bathed the babies, wiped down the kitchen, and restored order to the chaos. The domesticity of it felt natural now, comfortable in a way that their marriage never had been. Back then, they'd been trying to maintain perfect appearances while everything crumbled underneath. Now, covered in baby food and exhausted from single parenting, they were actually building something real. After Felix and Iris were clean, fed, and playing contentedly on their mat, Sienna made tea for both of them and sat down on the couch. Darius joined her, close but not touching, giving her space to say whatever she needed to say. "The presentation went really well," she started. "The board loved the family initiative proposal. Jennifer thinks they're going to approve expanded parental leave and flexible scheduling for all employees. That's great. You did good work on that. We did good work. You're the one who pushed for the change in the first place. She set down her tea and turned to face him fully. But that's not what I want to talk about. Okay? Being away from the babies was hard. Harder than I expected. But being away from you was harder. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in for 3 days. I kept wanting to call you and talk about stupid things, share observations about my day, hear your voice before I fell asleep. I realized something. Darius's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. What did you realize? That I'm in love with you. Still. Again. I don't even know which one it is because maybe I never stopped. I just buried it under all the hurt and disappointment. Tears filled her eyes, but she kept going. And I'm terrified, Darius. I'm absolutely terrified because I let myself love you once, and you broke my heart into so many pieces. I didn't think I'd ever find them all. And now I'm doing it. Again, except this time it's worse, because Felix and Iris are involved. If you leave, if you change back into who you were, you won't just be breaking my heart. You'll be breaking theirs too. I'm not going anywhere. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Sienna, I know I can't erase the past. I can't undo the hurt I caused or give you back the months you struggled alone. But I can promise you that I've learned. That I'm different now because losing you taught me what actually matters. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you and Felix and Iris are my priority. Not my company. Not my career. Not anything else. You three are what I choose. Every single time. How can you be sure? How can you promise you won't slide back into old patterns when things get stressful? Or when some amazing opportunity comes along? Because I've had amazing opportunities come along. In the past 6 months, I've turned down deals that the old me would have killed for. I've restructured my entire life around being present. And every single time I've had to choose, I've chosen you, chosen them. He squeezed her hand gently. It's not hard anymore, Sienna. It's not a sacrifice or a struggle. It's just obvious. Nothing else matters as much as this. She was crying openly now. I want to believe you so badly. Then believe me. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, while she cried against his chest. I'm here. I'm staying. And I'm asking you, will you marry me? Again? She pulled back, eyes wide. What? I'm asking you to marry me. Not because we need the paper or because I want to reclaim something we lost, but because I want to build something new. A real partnership this time, where we're both present and both committed and both putting each other first. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Sienna. I love who you are, who you've become. The strength you've shown. I love being a father to our children. I love the life we're building together. And I want to make it official. What do you say? Are you serious right now? You're proposing while covered in baby food and exhausted from single parenting. Yes, because this is real life. This is what love actually looks like, messy and exhausting and covered in sweet potato. Not some perfect moment in a fancy restaurant. Just us, in the middle of the chaos, choosing each other. Sienna laughed through her tears. You don't even have a ring. I'll get you any ring you want, or no ring, whatever you prefer. I'm not trying to make some grand gesture here. I'm just asking if you're willing to try again. Build something better than what we had before, to let me spend the rest of my life showing you that I've learned my lesson, and I'm never making those mistakes again. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her. because slowly she started to smile. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Again. Darius kissed her then, properly, for the first time in over 2 years. It felt like coming home and starting fresh, all at once. Behind them, Felix started fussing, probably jealous of the attention, and they broke apart laughing. "Your son has terrible timing," Sienna said. "Our son," Darius corrected. "And he's right to be annoyed. We're ignoring them for adult stuff." They returned to the floor with the babies. This time, sitting close together, Sienna leaning against Darius, while they watched Felix and Iris play. It felt right, complete, like all the broken pieces had finally found their way back together, rearranged into something stronger than what had existed before. "So what happens now?" Sienna asked after a while. "Now we figure it out together. You finish your consulting project. I keep being chairman and actually enjoy having work-life balance. We raise these 2 troublemakers." He kissed the top of her head. "And eventually, when you're ready, we get married again. Maybe something small. Just us and the babies and a handful of people we actually care about. No big corporate wedding like last time. No big corporate anything. Those days are over." He meant it completely. This time, it's just about family, about building a life that's actually worth living, instead of a resume that's impressive, but empty. Iris crawled over to them and pulled herself up on Darius's leg, standing on wobbly legs and grinning with pride at her accomplishment. Felix, not to be outdone, did the same on Sienna's other side. "They're going to walk soon," Sienna said, wonder in her voice. "We're going to have 2 babies walking around this tiny apartment, destroying everything. Then maybe we should get a bigger place. All of us. Together." Darius looked at her carefully. "If you're ready for that. No pressure. We can keep separate apartments if—" "No," she cut him off with a smile. "I'm ready. For all of it. The bigger place, the life together, the marriage. I'm ready to try again because you've proven you meant what you said. That you've changed. That this is real." "Have you ever gotten a second chance at something you thought you'd lost forever? That moment when you realize maybe, just maybe, it's going to work out after all." That's where Darius and Sienna are right now. Scared but hopeful, building something new from the pieces of what broke before. 3 months later, they got married in a small ceremony in her apartment building's courtyard. Felix and Iris were there in matching outfits, held by a grandmother Darius had tracked down and reconciled with Sienna's father's mother, who'd been estranged for years but who wept with joy at meeting her great-grandchildren. Jennifer stood as Sienna's maid of honor. A handful of close friends completed the audience. No corporate obligations. No business colleagues invited out of networking necessity. Just the people who actually mattered. Witnessing 2 broken people choosing to try again. As Darius slipped a simple band on Sienna's finger, she'd refused anything flashy, saying she wanted something practical. For daily life with babies, he made promises that were completely different from the ones he'd made the first time around. Not promises about providing, or protecting, or building a future. Those were givens now. Foundational, rather than aspirational. Instead, he promised to show up. To be present. To choose them every single day, in big ways and small ways, until she never doubted his commitment again. To be the father Felix and Iris deserved, and the partner Sienna needed. And as she made similar promises back to him, to trust him, to let him in, to build this life, Together as equals and partners, Darius felt something fundamental settle in his chest. This was what success actually looked like. Not money or power or recognition. Not Forbes lists or corner offices or quarterly earnings reports. This, a small wedding with babies on hips and sweet potato, probably somewhere on his suit, and the woman he loved promising to try again, despite having every reason not to. This was what mattered. This was what he'd been missing during all those years of chasing achievement and calling it success. This sense of home, of family, of being part of something bigger than himself that actually meant something. Later, after the ceremony and the small celebration that followed, Darius sat in their new apartment, a bigger place. In Pasadena, they'd moved into the month before, with Felix asleep on his chest and Iris drowsing in Sienna's arms. His wife. He had a wife again. And children. A family he'd almost lost before he even knew it existed. "What are you thinking about?" Sienna asked softly, about how close I came to missing all of this. If I hadn't looked up at that exact moment in the airport, if I'd been too focused on my phone to notice you boarding that flight. He shook his head. "I almost lost you all without even knowing you existed. But you didn't. You saw us. You followed us. You chose to change instead of insisting we accept you as you were." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You chose us, Darius. Every day you keep choosing us. That's what matters. I'll keep choosing you. Forever." He kissed her temple. "That's not a promise I'm making lightly this time. I know what I'm committing to. And I'm all in." And watching his daughter sleep, feeling his son's heartbeat against his chest, with his wife warm against his side, Darius knew he'd finally figured out what he'd been working toward his entire life. Not an empire, not a legacy measured in dollars or market share, but this, a family, a home, a life built on presence and love, and choosing what mattered over what merely looked impressive. He'd spent 15 years building the wrong thing and calling it success. Now, finally, he was building something worth having, something that would outlast any company or quarterly report, something real, and that made him richer than any bank account ever could. So here's what I want you to take away from Darius and Sienna's story. Success, without people to share it with, is just loneliness in an expensive suit. Time is the only currency that really matters. And it's never too late to change, to choose differently, to rebuild what you broke if you're willing to actually do the work. Darius learned that lesson the hard way, by losing everything that mattered. But he also learned that second chances are possible if you're willing to prove through actions, not just words, that you've genuinely changed. The question is, what are you choosing? What are you prioritizing? And more importantly, what are you missing while you chase things that don't actually matter? Think about that. Really think about it. Because Darius almost let pride and stubbornness and his obsession with proving his worth cost him his children, his family, his chance at actual happiness. Don't make that mistake. Don't wait for a wake-up call in an airport terminal to realize what you're losing. Choose the people you love. Choose presence over presence. Choose time over money. Choose life over resume. Because at the end of the day, nobody wishes they'd spent more time at the office. Nobody lies on their deathbed celebrating another closed deal. What matters is the people you loved and who loved you back. The moments you showed up. The times you chose connection over achievement. That's the lesson. That's what Darius and Sienna learned. And that's what I hope stays with you long after this story ends. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or question your own priorities, let me know in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story about what really matters in life. Thank you for being here, for investing your time in this journey, for caring about these characters and their second chance at happiness. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember, choose wisely. Choose love. Choose presence. The rest is just details.